Okay, so I'm a 25-year-old female, and I'm positive I saw a demon in my house. Last March or April of 2019, I was in my room on my phone, and my sister was in her room asleep, when I had noticed a dark figure with what looked like horns move from the kitchen to my parents' room. The house that my family and I live in was built in 1978, the year my brother was born. When we bought the house to renovate it, things that were unexplainable started to happen. The first day we started to prep for renovations, I was dressed for work, and my mum was in the kitchen, and my dad had just arrived with my dogs. We had plastic on the carpet to keep from ruining it with the paint, but we were replacing it anyway. The room that I originally wanted was the last to your left in the hall, next to the bathroom, whereas the current room I'm in now is towards the front of the house. Our house is built different, so let me explain it to you as best I can. When you walk into the front door, you enter the hallway before entering the living room. The wall between the entryway and the living room has two cutouts the size of two long thin windows. If you enter the house and make a left, you come upon the hallway where my bedroom is. My sister's bedroom and the bathroom is as described earlier. The living room comes next. From there, you enter the back of the house, which contains my parents' room, the dining room, the kitchen, and a small laundry room that leads out to the garage. Anyway, the room my sister resides in was going to be my room, until the day we started to prepare for renovation. I was sitting in one of the cutouts in the wall between the living room and the entryway, when my older dog walked by to see my dad, who was at my sister's room, counting the light switches and outlets. I guess my dog had sensed something and started to back away from my dad with his tail tucked under. That's when I knew I didn't want that room anymore, so I took the front room. Ever since that day, things started to happen more in the house during renovation. Knocking happened. Doors opened on their own with no explanation. Once we moved in, about a month later, my mum's Bible was messed with. She had said it was open and all the loose papers were scattered. Water in the bathroom down from my room would turn on by itself. The bathtub faucet would go from cool water to scorching hot a few times, but has since stopped. One night, both my parents heard someone walking on the wood floors in the kitchen and something opening a cabinet. Another night, during a storm when my sister stayed in my room, she recorded the lightning, and when she played it back, she heard something opening and closing my door and growling, which we were up and noticed that the door never opened nor closed, but you could hear it clearly on the video. To this day, I feel like I'm being watched in my own home when I'm alone. It probably also doesn't help that I worked in a real demon-infested haunted attraction in October of 2019. I do get scratched and the feeling of being touched in my sleep sometimes. So far, the demon, or whatever it is, hasn't furthered its harm. I do leave it be and don't bother it in any way to anger it. But I want to know if anyone would have any idea as to why a demon would bother me more than anyone else in my family if I've not messed with anything spiritual. Because it would help to know why it chose me. I also believe this thing, or this demon, has been with me for a long time since I could sense it around me. But my family thinks I'm crazy. So this is a series of events that happened between the ages of 4 and 12. When I was younger, we weren't able to afford our own apartment, so we had to rent a room. my stepdad had a friend that offered to help. It was me, my 2 siblings, and my mother and stepfather. The guy's name was Diego, and he lived with his family. At first, we lived in his garage before moving into a tiny room. I didn't know exactly why at the time, but Diego got a divorce from his wife and she kicked him out. This was around the time I was 4, and my stepdad offered to rent out to Diego, as we were in the process of finally moving into our own apartment. We moved in, and all was well. Diego brought his son, whose name was Valentine, and they rarely let us in their room. For all we knew, they didn't exist. Then, out of the blue, they had a puppy dog. For whatever reason, they never let us play with it. We didn't mind really, since we couldn't care less. But then the dog went missing, or so we were told. Diego and Valentine didn't seem to care, and again, they got another puppy. We didn't think too much of it at the time, so we didn't care again. So one day, my mum goes to speak with them about something mundane, and she was shocked to see an altar to Santa Muerte, which is the notorious saint of death that the Mexican cartel pray to. Turns out, they were sacrificing their dogs in her name. My mum was terrified and told my stepdad, who then kicked them out. They moved out a few apartments down, and I remember Valentine would always taunt me with knives whenever I saw him. So anyway, me and my sister moved into the room and never really cared because we didn't know what was going on at the time. One night, me and my sister were watching Family Guy when we heard scratching on the window. This was one of those side windows that went to the backyard, in which there was a fence that overlooked the back of the apartments onto the sidewalk. We looked, and that's when we both saw what we thought was a werewolf-looking creature with yellow eyes just staring at us. At first I thought it wasn't real, but then it turned fast as hell and slammed the backyard door closed, causing the whole fence to shake. From that day to the day I moved out, the fence was always bent in a way that seemed like it was pulled outward, like a ramp. My apartment building was just one block of 4 apartments that were all vacant, so we were all alone. I didn't believe what I saw, so I asked my sister, and she said she saw the same thing. We told my mum, and we switched rooms. Now my stepdad slept in the room alone. Another night, me and my sister were getting ready to sleep, when the windows started banging like if multiple people were hitting at it at once. Again, we told our mum, but there was nothing else she could do. There are other times things have happened as well. We used to have a stuffed wired doll that would pray whenever and only when the hands were clamped together. So one night, my stepdad heard the noise and went to find the figure. He found it in the bathroom, with its head in the toilet like something invisible was drowning it. He grabbed it since he wasn't scared easily, and found it with no batteries. My last big story, even though there were far more things happening, was that one day we walked to the store as a full family. The walk was around 3 to 5 minutes as we went to and from the local 7-Eleven that was basically in our backyard. When we got back, everything in the house was thrown over. The TV stand, every framed picture, basically just everything was thrown all over the floor. It was as if there was a small earthquake that only took place in our house. We still stayed because we couldn't afford a new place, so we did everything we could to stop this stuff from happening. Things did cool down, but not all the way. It wasn't until 8 full years later, when we moved, that we realized that it wasn't just the house that was haunted. Things followed us to our new home, but we rarely ever encountered anything. The only thing that's still attached are nightmares we have once in a while. To this day, I'm 17 years old and still have nightmares and dreams about my old home. As crazy as it sounds, I actually missed the old home and plan to visit sometime, as that's where I was raised and had the best moments of my life. Every once in a while, I would dream of someone being in my room, in the dark, waiting for me to get up, only to get stabbed in the same place on my stomach. I always wake up with a pain, as if I'd sprinted a mile after drinking a gallon of water without stretching. I'm not sure if anyone understands what I mean. I feel like no matter what the ritual is for, if your intentions are pure enough, like pure hate or pure love or pure anything, and you offer some part of yourself, whether it be your blood or something in a more spiritual way, you will always get results. In 2018, I went on a semester abroad in Korea, and one of our weekend trips was to visit the demilitarized zone, or DMZ, between North and South Korea. I wanted to go because I thought it was important for me to understand the place I was in better than just a short academic visitation. We drove up in a tour bus and spent almost the whole day going there, being there and coming back. Visiting the actual border of the DMZ wasn't that unnerving. The folks stationed there were very nice, and even though they warned us to mind our P's and Q's, I was still at a relative ease. I knew I had to be very respectful of this place, and tried not to goof around or take pictures of too many things. It was really educational and enlightening. Here's where the weird stuff begins. We got back on the bus, drove up the road, and we were invited to walk down the actual excavated third tunnel under the DMZ. There were virtually no animals anywhere around. No birds, no bugs, no wildlife at all. The area is like a grassland with some trees, so I expected there to be some birds or squirrels, or even mosquitoes since it was going into spring. But there was literally nothing except the people who worked there and our tour group. That started to make me uncomfortable, because even at the actual border, there were some pigeons and crows. It immediately had my hackles up. There was supposed to be a shuttle that goes all the way down to the armistice clock, but it was being repaired, so we had to walk. The further we walked down the tunnel, I felt like I was walking through rising water. It started at my ankles, and then up to my knees, my waist, and by the time we got close to the armistice clock, I felt like I was all the way up to my neck. I started walking on the balls of my feet, with my chin up on reflex, because I had the physical sensation that I was trying to wade through neck-deep water. I didn't notice until my friend asked me why I was walking funny. When I walked normal, I felt like the water was over my head and I couldn't breathe. When I got to the armistice clock, I felt dizzy. My vision was getting spotty, and I wanted to turn back. I couldn't move my feet from where I was standing. I felt like something was pushing at my chest, and all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't myself. I felt like I was someone else. I looked down and I felt like I was wearing the wrong clothes. I remember thinking, I'm out of uniform. I kept trying to push the thoughts away and leave, but I couldn't move. I felt frozen. I was staring at the wall behind the clock, a wall that was supposed to be a barrier to keep people from using the tunnel to move between the north and south. Even though I couldn't see anything but the wall, My brain felt like I was looking at a woman and her son. I didn't know how to describe it. I guess it's like you're not looking at something, but your brain is receiving some information telling you that you are. I felt like I knew them. The longer I stood there, the more people I thought were there. I remember thinking, there are 12 of them. I kept stepping closer and closer until one of my friends asked me what I was doing. I didn't even realize I was moving from where I was originally standing, which was about 3 or 4 feet back from the clock. I couldn't snap out of it until my other friend tapped my shoulder and said we had to go back up and get back to the bus. When I returned and looked at my friend, I didn't recognize her. When I turned around to leave, I remembered hearing the woman say, "Wait, where are you going?" When I kept walking, I heard her say, "Please don't leave us down here." I wanted to cry. I didn't feel like myself until I got back on the bus to drop off my backpack and stop in the gift shop before we went back to the campus. Apparently, I looked terrified. The cashier asked me if I was okay, and when I said I was, she kind of gave me a funny look. I eventually got over it until my friend went to Korea on a semester abroad last fall. They went to the DMZ again, and I asked him if anything weird happened. He told me that he felt the feeling of rising water too, and even the weird out-of-body feeling at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel doesn't end until you're past the border, but the end we stopped at was the clock on the wall. If you go further, like right to the wall, you get in huge trouble, and I wasn't going to risk that after already feeling strange. He told me that there was this film they had watched after the tunnel that documented its history, like when the tunnel was completely flooded to keep people from using it to move between countries. I missed the film because it took me forever to get up the ramp for some reason. I mean, I knew I was out of shape, but it felt like I got hit by a freight train for some reason. So I walked around the museum, looking at some photos of the Peace Talk complex's construction, and the different complexes that are around the DMZ, like housing for people stationed there, and for workers at the Kaesong Industrial Complex, which has been decommissioned for a long time. It really unsettles me when I think about it. If I think about it too long, I don't sleep right for a couple of days. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was the spring of 1998, when I was 14. My Boy Scout troop went hiking in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee, and the boys in my troop were people I'd known my whole life, and we were all very close and knew each other very well and trusted each other. We'd been hiking for 5 days or so, and it was miserable. It rained every day, and we were all exhausted and sore and hungry and covered with blisters. The adults realized that we had bitten off more than we could chew in trying to hike a 60-mile trail, especially with the awful weather. So we had changed course and gotten off the trail to spend the night in a drive-in campground. The kind of place with hookups for RVs and picnic tables and fire pits and grills, and a central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area, far from town or a house. There may have been a few other small groups there, but if there were, we never interacted with or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet, and thus excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark and we'd finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends, including my friend Jeremy, who, like everyone else in our group, I had known since we were babies, headed up to the bathhouse, which was maybe a 1/4 mile walk through the pitch-dark woods. up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up, and after 10 or 15 minutes, followed them myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old incandescent kind, pre-LED. I remember the woods were totally silent. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light from it off in the distance through the woods. I heard a noise to my left, and I looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old-school manual water pump, about 20 feet off the trail. The kind of pump where you would raise and lower the handle to pump water up from a well. There was a strange light around him, like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there, by himself in the woods, off the trail. I asked him if he was already done with his shower. He seemed kind of sad and he said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said, "Okay," and didn't think much of it until I got to the bathhouse. When I walked in the door, my friends were all in there and I heard Jeremy talking from in the shower. All the blood drained out of my head, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were freaked out and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them what had happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot. This was long before any of us had experimented with any mind-altering substances. But I could tell they believed me. Like I said, we had known each other forever and knew when one of us was exaggerating or playing a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth and whatnot, and then walked back together in total silence. When we got to the spot I had seen whoever, he was gone without a trace. The water pump was there though. No one had noticed it before because it was a ways off the trail and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite and went to bed freaked out. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all the years since then, I've never been able to figure out what happened. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend? Unlikely. Did I hallucinate it? Also unlikely. Who's to say? I've had numerous weird or creepy things happen to me, as I wholeheartedly believe my childhood home was haunted. But this one experience shook me to my core, and I'm sure will stay with me for life. It happened in my childhood home actually, but it has only been a little under 2 years ago. I'm 24 now, and at the time of this, I had just given birth to my son. He was a few months old. My partner at the time worked out of state. So I had taken my son to spend the weekend at my mother's home. He was asleep in her room, with her when this happened, which I find myself thankful for some reason. My old bedroom in the home was right across the hall from the bathroom, just a couple of steps away. I had gotten out of bed around midnight to use the bathroom and grab a drink from the fridge. I walked across the hallway, used the bathroom, and started through our living room/den towards the kitchen. There is a living room with a TV and set of couches to the right, and the den with a fireplace and more couches to the left. As I walked by, I felt extremely uneasy, and like I just shouldn't look towards the spot right next to the fireplace. I ignored this, as I'd had many other minor experiences in the home. After I got to the fridge and took a drink of water, I turned to walk back to my bedroom, a straight shot. As I passed by the fireplace, I could feel someone looking at me. Once I got to about the middle of the room, I could feel and hear someone coming up behind me, kind of at an angle. I genuinely thought it was a family member trying to scare me. My younger brother lived there at the same time. But when this being rushed up behind me, I could feel breath down the back of my neck and on my right ear. It then, in a raspy voice, almost yelled into my ear,
"Who's there?"
I knew at this point that no human being was in the room, because against my better judgment, I'd looked in this direction and saw nothing. I literally jumped at least a foot off the ground and sprinted as fast as I could the rest of the way to my room. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I never spent another night in that house. It was sold by my mother about a year later. She offered it to me and I declined. This experience is something that I just can't explain no matter how hard I try or want to. It bothered me for months after. I felt gross, like I had kind of an evil film over me from it. It took a while to shake it off. I work in a hospital as a nurse. I was on a row of nights, which I dread. I ended up having 5 patients, 2 of which were under care for cancer. There are 2 events here from 2 separate nights. Number 1. The night started normally, as I assessed and passed meds out to the patients and did my charting and other night duties, stocking and other stuff. Just around 11 PM, one of my palliative patients started ringing, complaining that there was a kid running into the room, laughing and playing, when they should be in bed. I checked the room to make sure there was no one in the room, and reassured him that there were no children in the hospital area we were in. I made him comfortable and left the room. He rang again, and I went back into the room to see what he rang for. Agitated, he said that he was just looking to rest comfortably, and that people should keep their children under control, and not to let them jump on his bed playing and laughing. This time, I got the chills, but again I reassured him that there were no children since it wasn't the pediatric ward. I told him that I would bring him a sleeping pill to help him fall asleep, but that I would be a few minutes. I started walking back towards the desk and the medication room to grab the sleeping pill. A bell rang. I turned around and saw that the indicator above his door was flashing. Slightly annoyed, I walked back to his room. He was agitated in his bed, and as I asked him what was wrong, he again complained about this kid. He said he was just in here again. I leaned over the bed and calmly explained, "There are no children in this hospital. You need to get some rest." He replied loudly, "He is standing right behind you." I stood straight up instantly and slowly turned around. Creeped out, I turned to face the patient, and before I could speak, he says he ran into the closet, referring to the lockers where patients can store items. I slowly opened the locker and saw that his jacket was swinging, but no one was in there. I turned and said, "There's no one in here." I rushed into the med room to give him a sleeping pill. Number 2. This will be a short one. I came out of one of my patient rooms and was sanitizing my hands but facing the wall. As I was rubbing my hands together, I noticed a shadow or something walk out of the room next door, and it walked into the room across from it as I turned to see. I went into the room where it walked into. I asked the patient, which was not mine, if anyone came into the room, and she replied, "No," but with a shaky voice. I checked the room to make sure there was no one in there. I left that room and went into the room where it came from. I looked around, but no one was in there. I checked the patient, again not assigned to me, and found that he had died. He was palliative. I walked out of the room immediately to inform the nurse who had the patient that he had died. She asked me to come with her to check the patient because she had been having creepy vibes every time she went in there. I agreed and we went. She did the assessment where you listen for a full minute. When she was done, we heard knocking on the wall. She said, "See, it's creepy." I didn't think anything of it until she said, "We're on the 4th floor, and on the other side of that wall is the outside of the building." We quickly left the room. 4 of us came in there to shroud the body. I lived in an old apartment in 2002. The place was built in 1900, so it was just over 100 years old when I moved in. The living room and kitchen were fine, but the bathroom and bedroom were unnerving. I just always felt like I was being watched, especially in the bedroom if the closet door was open. Those unnerving feelings just became moderately uncomfortable as I settled in. I felt safe in the bedroom, but only if the door was locked. One night, I was dead asleep when there was a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I got up the courage to get out of bed, I checked the apartment and all the windows were closed and locked from the inside. The door still had the chain secured, and no one was in there. I mentioned the closet door in the bedroom. I never liked going in there, and I never liked if the door was open. For some reason, in my head, I would hear gasping noises. For that reason, the closet stayed closed. A month or more after I was woken to the bang on my door, I was dead asleep, but something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew someone was standing over me. When I could finally turn on the bedside lamp, no one was there. After then, I couldn't sleep in the dark. I had to sleep with the lamp on. That incident scared the life out of me. And after that, the unnerving feeling of being watched intensified. Friends would come over and comment about being uncomfortable in the bathroom, like being watched. It became so uncomfortable for me that when I had the chance to move to another unit, I jumped at it. I packed up and got out. After me, several people rented the apartment, and they would move out within months. I became friendly with the building manager, and I told him I felt the place was haunted. He kind of laughed it off. Years after, they were renovating the place. The building manager was doing some painting there, and the building owner was there too. I went and checked out the apartment, and it looked nicer. It didn't feel as creepy. I got to talking with the building owner, and through the course of conversation, he just throws it out there that a former tenant committed suicide in the closet by hanging themselves. He also mentioned that the original designer of the building lived in that apartment, and he died in there. I wasn't mad when I heard this, but felt validated that what I experienced was real. I'm going to preface this by saying that paranormal experiences are not abnormal to me. I have seen ghosts many times over my life, and my mum claims to have seen me playing with them as a child. My mum was a psychic medium, so I spent a good deal of my childhood around this stuff. This is just to assure you that I've had experiences with the paranormal before, and that what I experienced I considered to be abnormal, generally, as most of my experiences, up until now, have been positive, or at least neutral. This was a few years ago, in my very early 20s. I'm in my mid-20s now. I hadn't had any paranormal experiences since a little while after my mum died when I was a teenager. I was starting to think the things I had experienced didn't happen at all. General denial. One night, on a whim while driving around a suburb near my house, I managed to convince my boyfriend to come with me to the local cemetery. I was going through a bit of an edgy phase and thought going to a cemetery at night would be cool. This is a cemetery in a big city and is extremely large. I didn't believe in ghosts hanging around in a cemetery, so I thought it'd be fine. I believed that ghosts usually hung around the places they died, or places they had unfinished business, and it was very unlikely they'd be hanging around a graveyard. It was sometime in October, but not Halloween. We got to the cemetery around 11:30 p.m. and screwed around in the car for a bit before getting out sometime before 12 a.m. We had our phones with us, and we were using them as torches. We hopped the fence to the cemetery and started to look at all the graves, pointing out the most interesting ones and kind of screwing around. The place was completely deserted, as cemeteries tend to be at 12 a.m. We walked further and further in and entered the part of the cemetery where the graves were quite a bit larger and much older. By now, it had likely been around half an hour. As we were walking down the path, my boyfriend commented that there was a strange smell lingering around, which was extremely weird as my boyfriend can't smell at all. He lost his sense of smell due to a bunch of infections and other problems with his ears and sinuses as a child. I don't know the 100% details of the problems though. I couldn't smell anything, and I have above normal sense of smell, so we both shrugged the experience off. I was looking at one of the graves sometime later when my boyfriend shook my shoulder and pointed at one of the largest graves a few meters into the distance. I'm terrible at knowing where people are pointing, but this time I spotted it right away. It was a little girl, I guess around 11 or 12 years old. She had very dark brown or black hair that looked well cared for and quite long. She was sitting on top of the grave with her legs dangling over the edge. At first, I saw her wearing a lacy white dress, like a nightgown a rich girl would wear. It looked old, but I'm no expert, so I couldn't tell you how old, maybe 1900s. But I looked away to look at my boyfriend, and when I looked back again, she was wearing a different dress. All I remember is that it was red, because at this point, I was super scared. Something about the whole situation felt wrong to me. I felt extremely fearful, and due to the fact ghosts were very normal for me, this was extremely unusual. I'd never felt unsafe seeing a ghost before. It was around this time I noticed that the cemetery was eerily quiet. No sounds of bats. There are a lot of fruit bats in the area. Or any other animals, and the air felt stale and stagnant. We just stood up and stared at the little girl for what felt like an eternity, weirdly transfixed, and then we both ran for it up the path full speed. I turned for a second to see if she was still there, and she was gone completely. It made me run faster, honestly. And the whole run out, we were both dead silent. When we were back in the car, we sat there for ages trying to work out what we just saw, trying to rationalize it. But as we both had paranormal experiences before, we knew it had to be a ghost. For a few months afterwards, I continuously felt like I was being watched and had frequent nightmares about seeing the little girl in our apartment. I always felt uneasy. We eventually moved around 30 minutes away, and the feelings and dreams stopped. I've since tried to reach the ghost, but haven't turned anything up. Though there is a local ghost tour at the cemetery, and maybe the guide might know something. Ever since then, my paranormal experiences have been more frequent, and have been getting more unsettling and disturbing. My boyfriend has been experiencing things more frequently as well. These events happened sometime between 2013 and 2015. The first event took place in the summer. I was back home for the holidays after spending a year abroad. It was a Sunday morning, and I was having breakfast with my mum, the usual. In came my brother's girlfriend, who was staying over for the weekend. She picked a glass and proceeded to fill it up with tap water. As she was doing this, she looked out of the window directly over the sink of our kitchen and became paralyzed. After a few seconds, she turned to us with a very scared look and just kept on repeating, "This cannot be. I was just talking to him upstairs." I went up and looked out of the window, and I could only see my brother cleaning his dirt bike. He'd been out in the backyard for quite a while. His girlfriend, though, swore she had been talking to my brother in his room upstairs for at least 20 minutes. Then she came downstairs to get some water, and suddenly my brother was outside. This was obviously impossible, as I had talked to my brother minutes before she came down to the kitchen, and he never went back into the house. So, realizing she was truly shocked, I went upstairs to my brother's room. There was nobody in the upper floor. After this happening to her, she didn't go upstairs for a long time after that day. To date, I still don't know who or what she was talking to. Or could it be my brother was in two spaces at the same time? My mum believes there's someone living in our house. Someone as in a spirit. And even though I'm more of a rational guy myself, I have to admit this event unsettled me. The second strange occurrence involved my brother, his girlfriend, and a couple of friends and me. We were in the summer house, which my brother kind of had turned into his house at the time, playing PS3 and chatting over beers and cigarettes. I remember we were playing a rally game pretty competitively when suddenly the console crashed and the screen went black. When my brother got up to turn the console back on, a message appeared on the TV screen. It read, "Do you want to stop smoking?" and gave the two options to select yes or no. This message was coming from the TV itself. It was not a smart TV, there was no internet in the summer house, and the console was off. On top of that, the message was in Spanish. We lived in northern Spain. And the TV menus were in English. I mean, how in the world is that possible? We were all smoking. The five of us became very nervous and started trying to figure out how someone could pull out such an elaborate prank. But it was clearly impossible. None of us could hack into a TV system and program a pop-up window with this question. My grandpa died from heart disease caused by smoking. He would smoke a pack a day, and he built that house. I never really thought about him when this happened, but he died when I was just 6, so I don't really have many memories of him. Baffled as we all were, my brother just took a puff off of his cigarette and clicked the no option. To be honest, we played it kind of cool, kept enjoying the evening and sort of ignored what had just happened. For the next couple of weeks, we had no other topic in our conversations. I left for work at 12:30 a.m. and my wife went to take a shower at maybe 1 a.m, long after the kids were asleep. She said she heard the bathroom door open while in the shower and then close. She looked and saw no one. She thought maybe one of the 3 kids got up. So she looked in their rooms and they were all sleeping. She then told me that when she was laying down to sleep, she heard whispering in the living room and was thinking, what the hell? And she kept hearing things falling from the Christmas tree, but she went out to the living room and nothing had fallen. So what's funny is, around the same time last year, I had a few experiences, and it only lasted like 2 weeks. I was gaming on my PC, and I put my controller on my tower, and I exited the bedroom and closed the door. As soon as I closed the door, I hear my controller fall off my tower. I was thinking, maybe I didn't put it on the tower fully. So I put the controller back on my tower to be sure it wouldn't fall off. I close the door and it falls off again. My wife and her sis were outside the door and they knew what was happening. Me keep dropping my controller apparently, and were laughing. Meanwhile, I just turned around and looked at the door with a what the hell kind of look. I set up my phone to record my PC, but nothing happened. A few days later, I'm chilling on my couch, on my phone late at night. Lights are all off and I'm in the dark. Suddenly, I hear a crash in the bathroom, like a cup bouncing around in the bathtub. We kept a cup in the bath to rinse the kids. I'm thinking, well, one of the kids are up and they're making the noise. I go into the bathroom and nothing is in the tub. The cup is where it's supposed to be, and the kids didn't wake up from the loud racket. Odd, I thought. Then, another night, I'm lying in bed on my phone after my wife had fallen asleep, and I hear footsteps walk into our room. I'm thinking it's our 3-year-old. He always cries when entering our room, like almost every night. But he wasn't crying yet, so I was just going to let him stand there for a minute while I was on my phone because I was tired as hell. Then, a random picture fell from the dresser. That shot me up. I looked around the room with my phone light and I saw no child. I briskly walked into the kids' room and they were all sleeping. I got mad goosebumps when I saw the kids sleeping. Anyways, I'm starting to think that this is maybe the same spirit that passes through every year. We've lived here for about 3 years, and last year, around this time, the weird stuff happened that I mentioned. What do you all make of this? Personally, I really wish I was home when the whispering happened. My wife also said, a few days ago, when she was looking at the cameras in our kids' room while they slept, she saw a giant orb moving from their bunk beds to the door and disappeared. Not sure what to make of orbs, but she said it moved too strategically to be a dust ball. We moved into a house in Northamptonshire a few years ago and instantly felt something was odd with the house. That feeling when someone is watching you and cold drafts. My husband started feeling compelled to say things. For example, he'd tell me what I had done during the day with eerie detail. He'd tell me about a girl who talked to him, but in his head. Things started going missing or would be moved to random places. One day, he said, "Gone goozler," out of the blue. I've never heard that word before, and nor has he. I just assumed it was another one of his made-up words. But it turns out it's a word meaning someone who enjoys watching canals. There are a lot of canals in the area, and one in the village. When I asked why he said that word, he told me the girl had said it to him, and she loved the canal. The weirdest thing that happened, though, was one evening when both my husband and our daughter wanted a shower. They decided hubby would go first. But as we sat in our bedroom, we heard the bathroom door close, the light go on, and the shower start. so we assumed our daughter must have just beaten him to it. The shower ran for 45 minutes, and just as we were going to check she was okay, we heard the shower stop, and her come out of the bathroom and go downstairs. The light was left on, and my husband turned off the light and followed her downstairs and watched her go into her bedroom, which was downstairs. As he walked into the kitchen, though, our daughter walked in the back door. When he asked how she had gotten dressed so quickly, she told him she's been outside for the last hour seeing to her horses. So, who was in the shower? He saw a girl again a few weeks later, also stood in our daughter's doorway. Lots of other strange things happened there, but never anything scary, just freaky. Anyway, we moved a couple of years ago, and nothing has happened since, until this weekend. We went away to a hotel in Cornwall. On the first night, it was very foggy and cold. As we stood outside having a cig, he suddenly said, "Joan is waiting in the summer house." I asked what on earth he was talking about. He had a strange look in his face, and just said, "Joan is waiting in the summer house for Derek." Then he sort of snapped out of it, mouth hanging open, and said, "I've no idea where that came from." We talked about it, and he said he felt compelled to say those things. He also felt she was military. We carried on discussing it for a while, then mid-sentence he said, "He's married, and she's waiting for him in the summer house." A bit spooked, we decided to go back to our room. We searched on the internet and found out that in 1946, a young woman who was serving in the Navy was stationed at the hotel. Her name was Joan. She was having an affair with a married officer, and when they were found out, she was transferred to another site in Devon. On the night she was due to move, she was waiting for him in the summer house, where he shot her twice in the head. His name was William. We were totally freaked out. The man's name was wrong, but at that time, people used to be known by other names frequently. My granddad was John, but called Jack, and my grandma was Grace, but called Queenie. Perhaps he was really known as Derek. My cousin Lloyd passed away a couple of years ago. He had a bad relationship with his daughter due to choosing his new wife over her. His daughter never forgave him, and poor Lloyd spent his last years desperately trying to apologize for his horrendous mistakes and make peace, and try to meet his only granddaughter. Lloyd came to realize that family is everything. It's the only important thing in life. Sadly, he never did see his daughter or granddaughter. Lloyd would spend his holidays with my family instead. We loved him and tried to give him that family connection he was so desperate for. Last year, I had an enormous fight with my mum and blocked her. About 2 months after that, things started going missing. It was just little things at first, once every week or two. One of my favourite makeup brushes, my good hand cream, my favourite lipstick, my hairbrush, perfume, and worst, my engagement ring. Just small, very personal items, and only my stuff. And they were all items that have a designated place that I don't put down anywhere else. Over time, it became more and more items, more and more frequently, until I'd put something down, and as soon as I'd reach for it again, it'd be gone. This was happening every day. It was driving me crazy. My house had become super active for it. The footsteps could be heard at all hours, day and night, doors opening and closing, TV turning itself on in the middle of the night, and guitars strumming themselves, whispering, lights turning on and off, etc. I kept asking for my things back, but to no avail. Then, 2 of my dog's paperwork folders went missing. These folders contain all of my dog's important paperwork, pedigree papers, vaccination certificates, champion titles, etc. I breed and show my dogs. And right now, I need both of these particular dogs' folders, as one is about to be bred and the other needs a booster vaccination, and I need her vax certificate to take to the vet with me. I have 10 dogs, and keep these folders all together in my filing cabinet. Only these 2 were missing. Finally, it clicked. Bloody Lloyd was behind this. I don't know why I made the connection. Perhaps I could feel it was him, I don't know. At this stage, I hadn't spoken to my mum in 11 months, and I knew that's what Lloyd was upset about. So, I unblocked her number in my phone and told Lloyd, "Stop already, I'm doing it." A few days later, I get a text from my mum and I answer it. We start talking again, and the activity stops. Not another thing goes missing. The house is back to normal, no longer the freak show it had become. I start asking Lloyd for my stuff back, and nothing. A week goes by, and it's my mum's birthday. I buy her a gift and go around to her place and have a visit. When I get home, I walk through the door and step on my missing engagement ring. "You little beauty, thanks Lloyd," I say. Later that night, I find my favourite makeup brush on the floor of my bedroom. I vacuumed this morning. It definitely wasn't there then. Again, thanks Lloyd. Yesterday, I went out of town to do some Christmas shopping, and as well as buying presents for other people, I bought my mum a present. I came home to find my 2 dogs folders were on the dining room table. There's nothing else on that table, ever. So, my dead cousin Lloyd is using theft and bribery to make me have a relationship with my mum. If you knew Lloyd, you would know it's absolutely his style. Family is the most important thing.